Hello and welcome to the Magic of Color. The idea for this class is that it will be the main takeaways for a color theory class that you might have in college or art school. But we're going to go in a lot deeper than that. Some personal insights, things that I found really helpful along the way. And then there's going to be some homework, which I strongly suggest that you do. If you've never done the color swatch assignment, it really is helpful on learning how to mix paint. Some things that you'll learn in the class are how to mix color, how to pick colors, how to use colors as focal points, how to neutralize color, how to darken and lighten your color, how to keep your colors rich, what colors to avoid, and so much more. And when you're finished with this class, I also recommend that you take our Painting Color and Light, as that's kind of the more advanced class on how to really use color and lighting together to get really cool effects. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so this video is going to be called Additive versus Subtractive Color Mixing. Not the most exciting subject, but one that you definitely need to learn for your color illustration. And so here we go. Let's look at this chart on additive and subtractive color mixing. Additive mixing is what happens when we mix different colors of light together, and subtractive color mixing is what happens when we mix actual physical paint or digital paint, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But when we're talking about actual light mixing, where does that occur? Where do we mix lights? We're talking about if you're a set designer or a lighting designer for theater, or if you're an art director or a lighting director for film, you're going to be making decisions on what color light you're going to use on set. Those lights will mix together, and those colors will actually make different colors when mixed than when you mix colors in actual paint. And so let's play around with that just a little bit, and we'll look at we'll have these primary colors here. Now if I actually mix these together, I might also add that I'm talking to you using Photoshop, which is using a screen which is made of light, but the programmers that program this program, Photoshop, and basically all the other painting programs, have already taken into consideration that they're trying to mimic paint. So they're geared to mimic paint, not light. So you might think, well, it's light, it should work like light. No, they've programmed it to work the opposite of that, to work in subtractive color mixing. So if this was light and we mix them together, we should get this magenta color right here, something like that. But you'll see that as I mix this over here, the color in between is not going to be that magenta. In fact, it goes darker. So it actually behaves totally different than light would actually work. And again, if I were to mix these three colors together, I should get white. So if I mix the green and I mix the red, and let's get a nice mix area right there, and then I put the blue on top, it should turn to white, but it's not. It's turning to something like this kind of gray color here. And that's what happens when you mix paint. So if I do the same thing over here, I take the yellow and I take the magenta, and then I throw some cyan on top of that, it should give me more of a grayed out color, which it does. And that's subtractive color. I can't show you what mixing light would be like because Photoshop doesn't allow you to mix light. But it's good to know the difference, because if we're dealing with color terms and you ever end up in a situation where you have to mix light, or you're teaching something, you should know the difference between the two, because they act very differently. And yeah, that's about it for additive and subtractive color mixing. Okay, I'm back, and this is video number 3, color terms. And before we get started on this one, you're looking at a picture of Henry Munsell, and I'm not going to go into this a lot, but he is basically the foremost authority on color. He wrote 3 different books, a color notation, Atlas of the Munsell Color System, and a book after he was dead, A Grammar of Color. And he's basically responsible for much of what we know about color today. So if you want to do a little bit more reading or studying, if this video doesn't go deep enough, definitely check out Henry Munsell. And that's also going to be in the PDF. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the color wheel and where we get it. And so you're looking at a picture of a rainbow, obviously, and that's basically where we get our colors. It's called the color spectrum. It's what happens when light is broken apart. White light is actually made up of a bunch of colors. We talked about that in the previous video on additive color mixing, and so white light can also be broken apart into colors, and so that's where we get the color wheel. It's really important to notice and to be aware of the order of the rainbow. So it's always the same. And these are things that I feel are really obvious, but maybe they're not. And so, red is never next to green. Red is next to yellow, and red is also next to purple. The other thing that the rainbow doesn't actually show us is, and you can see it on this picture a little bit, it's going purple again over on this side, but usually we don't think of the color wheel as syncing back up again, but it really does. It starts on one side and it goes purple, then it goes blue, then it goes green, then it goes yellow, then orange, then red, and then it goes back to purple again. So if I were to draw that, I would basically kind of start on one end and just kind of get a red, right, and kind of place that there, and then I would get yellow. I'd try to get a perfect yellow, and maybe I'll put that right here. And this is something that you should be able to do from memory. So if you can't do this right now, then I'll just get a kind of a blue right here. This is something to practice, and I'll put this in the workbook as something for you to practice as well. So those are the main 3 colors on the color wheel, and then the colors in between. Those are also called primary colors, and there's only 3 of them. And there only ever are 3 primary colors: red, yellow, and blue. And then there's the secondary colors, which are the colors that are in between on the spectrum. So we just saw that on the rainbow. Well, let's just have you look at it right there. What's in between red and yellow? It would be, hopefully you said orange. And so I'm just going to kind of get an orange and place it right here. And then in between red and blue, right in here, we've got this kind of purple, kind of magenta kind of color. And then in between the blue and the yellow, we have green. And then from here, you can kind of just mix these together. And I'm just going to kind of pull these. You can make a color wheel with paint, which is a great exercise to do, actual physical paint. You can do it digitally. And again, this class is meant for both traditional and digital painters. The same principles apply. And like we talked about in the previous video, that even though I'm using digital, which is using light from the screen, the developers of Photoshop and any other digital painting program have mimicked the physics of what happens when you actually use paint. So they're going for that subtractive method, which is what we're doing right now. I'm just going to keep mixing these together. Grab some of that orange and blend it in over here. And that's pretty much our color wheel right there. And it's my attempt right here isn't perfect, but it's pretty dang close. And you can see when I pick out these colors right here, if I pick that one, that green is different than this green. And then we go to yellow, and then we go to this kind of really light orange, and then a darker orange, and then a super darker, a reddish orange, and then red. And so I'm going to skip to this other graphic right here and show you that that's basically what we're seeing here. So we have our primary colors, and then we have our secondary colors, which are made from the primaries, and then we have tertiary colors. And it's, like I said before, it's really important to understand where they're placed on the color wheel, and that will be revealed in a later video on why that's so important, because we'll actually use that in making rich colors when we paint. So that's super important to remember those relationships. And again, it's, if you don't know it now, it's something that you can definitely learn later on. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about on this video are a few more terms. We're going to talk about the hue of a color, the saturation or chroma. Those terms are interchangeable, and then the value. So if I go to my color picker here, I'm just going to use red. And if I take this red and I'm just going to lightly paint and add a little more pressure until I get the full intensity of the color right there. So what we're talking about with hue is basically the name of the color, right? So this one would be obviously red. So if you're looking at, like, if you're buying paints in the art store and you see hue, that's what that means. It means red, green, purple, yellow, orange. The next term would be saturation or chroma, and that deals with the intensity. So if I pick out this part, this is the same red, and that's the full intensity when I pick it from this low, this lower intensity right here. And so we would say that this has a low saturation or a low chroma. On the other hand, if I take this pure color right here in its full intensity, we would say that's very saturated, or the chroma is very high. It's very pure. And then the value of a color is more, I can show you that more with taking a color. Actually, let's stick with the Photoshop colors. If I take this purple right here, and then that's a pure color. When I grab it up here, it can't get any more intense or saturated than that. And then if I do the same thing with yellow, okay, what we're talking about when we talk about the value of a color is which one is darker, and that could easily be looked at too if we turn this into grayscale. So I'm just going to turn this layer into grayscale, and now you can see that the purple color is much darker, even on a value scale using black and white. So that's what we're talking about. Colors actually have value as well, even though in their pure hue or pure chroma or saturation, they each one is a pure color on the rainbow, but some are darker than others. And I think, I don't know the technical reason for that, but I think that the frequency of that light wave is lower or higher, but don't quote me on that. Okay, so that's it for this video, and in the next one we'll start talking about tints and shades. Okay, back with video number 4, color value. And so in this one we're going to talk a little bit more about we're going to talk more about mixing colors and the value of colors and things like that, and then color attributes. So let's get going on that. I've got this image right here, and I'm also going to bring in a color wheel, and just want to talk a little bit about the difference between a tint and a shade real quick. If we have a color, right, a pure color, and these are all the pure hues, the most intense chroma. If I take white, and I'm just going to grab it from the screen here, and I mix that with that pure color, the result is called a tint. So that now is a tint. Now if I mix white with that and I get that color, that's also a tint. So anytime you mix white with a color, you get a tint of that color. And anytime you mix black, so I'll get some black here. Anytime you mix black, that's called a shade. So this is a shade of the original pure color. And these terms are, you know, it's like, it's kind of weird, but you probably won't use these terms that often. But if someone says, you know, well, I like the shade of that color, I like the tint of that, which you hardly ever hear. It's just important. It's good to know these terms, because if you're ever in an environment where someone is talking about it, you want to just automatically kind of know what they're talking about. I guess it depends on the circles that you're hanging out in, right? So there we go. These are different shades of that original color. And the reason I have this image up here is because we can see, you know, if we have this color right here, right, and then we have this color down here, this one should be lighter, which it is. And the way they got that color lighter is, I mean, obviously it's nature, but the way that you would reproduce that in a painting is you would probably add white to it. So the same thing up here, if we have this color right here, then to get down to this color right here, we would add white, right? So if I take that color again right here and just add a little white to it, I'm going to end up with about the same color, just a lighter version. Okay, so that's tints and shades. And then let's get rid of that layer. And the next thing we're going to talk about is saturation and neutralization. So we've already talked about saturation. Saturation, that's the chroma of a color. So if I take this blue right here, that's purely saturated. Now if I add a color next to on the color wheel to that, like this purple, I'm still gonna have an intense color. It's just gonna be different, right? And it's gonna be purely saturated. But if I take this same blue, let's get the blue again, and I go to the opposite of the color wheel, right over here, and I add that is actually neutralizing this color. I mean, it's hard to believe that I'm getting these dull colors out of there, but what you're not seeing are those little shades in between. So that's neutralizing. It's taking the intensity of those colors and it's dropping it way down so that they're not saturated anymore. Another way that you can neutralize a color is by adding white. So tinting a color, that tends to neutralize it, or does neutralize it. This is definitely not as saturated. And adding black. So when you add black and you make a shade of a color, you're also neutralizing that color, right? So whenever you hear somebody talking about neutrals, you know, in decorating or designing, you talk about neutral colors a lot. That's what they're talking about. Those colors that are not saturated anymore. I think it's also interesting to note that at this time would be a good time to talk about opposites. So we talked before, and I showed you the primary colors, which would be red, and then yellow, and then blue. And you notice that divides the color wheel into thirds. Well, the opposite on each of those colors is a primary color against a secondary color. So if you have blue, its opposite is never going to be a primary color, it's going to be a secondary color, right? And the interesting relationship between blue and orange is, and we're going to talk about temperature a little bit later, but blue and orange are the coolest color and the warmest color. So you can't get a greater differentiation than orange and blue. So that's an attribute that those color opposites have. And then if you take red, so red is definitely one of the primary colors, right? And its opposite is green. And these two colors have, their interesting attribute is that they're both super intense. Value-wise is about the same value. So if we turn this to grayscale, they're going to look about the same in value. And because of that, they tend to do a thing called vibrating. They actually vibrate those colors. And we'll talk about that, and I'll show you some more things in another video on vibrating colors. But that's the key attribute between red and green, is that they both try to grab attention. They both come forward. And then if we take purple, and then its opposite, which is going to be yellow, the biggest difference between these colors are the value, and we already talked about that before. They're the darkest and the lightest of the primary and secondary colors of the opposites. So those are interesting things to note, I think, because when you're designing, it's just important to understand the differences, that if you're going to choose a purple and yellow color scheme, you're going to be having dark colors against very light colors. And if you choose a red and green, then you're going to have to figure out how to keep those colors under control, because they're both going to compete for attention. And likewise, blue and orange will definitely give you really strong cold appearances and warm appearances. And that's it for this video. Okay, we're back, and this video is going to be called Color Harmony. And so just going to talk a little bit about what it means to have colors that are harmonizing. Another word for that is colors that are getting along. You think about harmony when you think about music. If someone's singing off key, it doesn't really match, and it sounds out of place. And so if we look at, let's just look at flavors, right? Food flavors. You have color harmony, or I'm sorry, you have harmony in the flavor profiles that you have in food, right? So if you had some ice cream, would that go really well with tomato sauce? Probably not. What if we threw some pickles in there and some fish sauce, right? So those are typically colors that, or I'm sorry, foods or tastes, flavors that don't really go together. So the opposite would be flavors that do go together, right? So if you think about, like a nice stew where the carrots and the potatoes take on the flavor of the meat and the onions, and they all kind of work together, that's more of a flavor harmony. A color harmony, let's look at a couple that work and a couple that don't work, and I think I'll pull some colors out of these. The woman on the left, we would say her colors don't really harmonize together very well. And the reason for that is, first you're trying to establish this color, and then you're trying to also establish this color right next to it. And they're just off just enough and just different that you're wondering, am I looking at the same color, or is there a difference? And your eye has a really hard time actually seeing that difference versus the woman who's dressed, and I'll try to get the saturated parts of her colors here. Even if I grab the saturated parts, they're different enough, and maybe I got in the shadow a little bit. That's really the difference that we're looking for. So we're looking for a dominant color, and we're looking for a more recessive color when colors are kind of harmonizing or getting along with each other. Then you put that with this dark color, and it makes an interesting color profile. Whereas if we picked colors that were all really close here, let's see if I pick another one and just move this down and stay in that saturated zone. It's hard for them to separate, and so because of that, we call that the colors are clashing when you're wearing clothing. Colors that, if you've ever had like a blue top and you're looking for a blue bottom, but the blue bottom
looks almost the same as the top. It's just off just a little bit. People are going to notice, and it's going to look funny. It doesn't look like the outfit matches. And so now let's look at a couple of color schemes that we've actually assigned terms to, so that we can come up with color schemes that actually work, and we have a really we'll always have a good idea that they're going to work because we're actually paying attention and using that deliberate color scheme. And the first one is called monochromatic, and we'll see this sometimes even in nature, and that's where you basically have one color family, and in this one it's going to be blue. So black and white don't count when you're talking about these different color schemes. It's only the color that counts. And so monochromatic, you probably already know what that is. It's basically where you have just basically one color, and the thing that you do differently is you add black or white to change that color. So you might start on the color wheel, and this one's probably not 100% of a pure monochromatic, and that's the other thing. One of the reasons why I'm not going to get caught up in talking about all of the color schemes that there are, because there's a lot of them. It's simply because you get into opinion, and I don't want to argue opinion. There's the split, there's the tetratic and the split complementary and the tetratic color schemes, and those are I think once you start to go down those roads, you start to kind of lose the argument, because you might have two people that are experts that disagree on whether something fits in one or the other, and it's not really important, and people don't classify their color scheme very often, other than saying it's a monochromatic, analogous, or complementary, which we'll end up talking about. But if I take this blue right here and I add, let's just grab some black here, and we've already got white on the paper, right? And so within this blue, I say, okay, I'm going to grab some of this color, and I'm going to grab some of this color. All of these colors here, we'll add a little bit of more black there. Those are all going to fit within a monochromatic color scheme, right? You might even have some really light ones. So you can sometimes see that in nature. There's times where that's really helpful to use. You'll see it in film a lot, like in a night scene where the blue kind of colors everything one color, and you really don't see much variation in color. You see that in the movie series The Matrix, where everything kind of has a green tint to everything, and in some scenes it's black, white, and green, and variations of black, white, and green only. So it's a very common color scheme, and it works, and it's easy to make your colors harmonize because there's only one color. So there's really nothing for the one color to get along with except itself, which it always will. And so that's a very harmonious color scheme. The next one we'll look at is analogous. And with analogous, what we're talking about, and I'm just going to bring this in, this color wheel here. We're talking about two places on the color wheel in the color scheme. And again, this photo isn't a perfect representation of an analogous color scheme, because what we're getting here, and I'll just show you, it's pretty dang close though, and so that's why I say it's really good to kind of go with the major, I would say the major part of that color scheme. We'll grab some of this down in here, and this is why it ventures off, is because it gets a little warm down in these areas, but for the most part you're dealing with two places on the color wheel, and which is you're kind of dealing with anywhere from probably here on over to here, but we're also adding white. So if we take this color right here, right, and we add a little white to that, you can see where we're kind of getting close on some of these colors in there, right? And it might actually go over a little further than that and grab a little bit more orange. It probably does. And that's again why it's almost analogous, but it kind of grabs a little bit of that orange to where it's not quite in that realm. But like if we take some of these colors here, and again, if we add a little bit of black to that, you can start to see, and then we add maybe a little bit of this color, which we're allowed to do, maybe a little white. You can start to see some of those colors like in here being similar. But we're definitely not getting these kinds of blues. We're not getting these kinds of greens. We're not getting these yellows. And so it's really, we're actually not even getting these kinds of bright oranges. It's really staying in this family on the color wheel right there. And so, and with analogous, that could go all the way around the color wheel too. That could go, you could have a segment from here to here, or from there to there. Any basically a primary and a secondary color will make that analogous color scheme. And if we look at, let's see, I'm going to throw this layer away. And let's look at this photo right here. This is probably a lot better of a representation of an analogous color scheme right here, because if we bring back that color wheel again, you can kind of see where we're going with this. It's going to head over to the green area a little bit. Just pull some of these colors, and then we go over to the bluer side. And so what we're doing on this one is we're basically coming in here and we're grabbing anywhere from here over to here. And again, analogous, but with the blue. Now, if we look at this photo right, let's see here. This one, you'd be tempted to say it's analogous, and it mostly is, but I'll show you why it's not. And again, I would mostly call it, analogous, because we're in that same zone, same family of colors again. But if you look at this sand here, it's probably got a little bit more warmish colors in there. Actually, it's not that warm. It's really pretty analogous. So it's just, maybe that's just an optical illusion that it actually looks warmer than it really is. Yeah, I'd say that is basically a pure analogous color scheme. So cool. Now let's look at the complementary. Okay, and so this one is a complementary color scheme primarily because you're dealing with colors, and I'll just start picking some of these out, that are opposites or near opposites on the color wheel. So we get some of these pink colors here. We've got some yellows, some greens more saturated than others, some more neutralized. Then we've got these blue colors back here as well. So this is a complementary color scheme. Let's look at the places on the color where we're hitting. We're hitting in the pinks, in the yellows and the greens, and we're also hitting the blues. So that's basically what's going to give you that complementary color scheme. Excuse me. Let's look at another one. I'll look at a few more. This one is basically, and you can usually identify the major colors that make it a complementary color scheme. And if you said blue and orange, you'd be right. Again, the blue and orange are opposites on the color wheel, and that's what you're looking for on a complementary color scheme. How about this one here? Or is that a trick? Is that actually a complementary color scheme? I don't know. We've got blues, we've got greens, we've got lighter greens, even yet lighter greens, or let's see. There we go. But if you saw these in here, just that little bit of color is going to make it a complementary color scheme, because this is in the orange family. And even though it's got a lot of white and black mixed in with it, it's still part of this family right here. That's where that orange is coming from. It's being neutralized down to that, but that still counts as a complementary color scheme. Let's look at this one here, one last one. This one's easy to spot. Like, once again, you've got that orange and the blue. And so yeah, so there you go. Those are the different color schemes. And I think that's all we're going to talk about on this one. Again, we could go further into split complementaries and triadics and split triadics and tetradics. If you want to look at those, go ahead. One thing I might mention is that the value in going a little further and looking at least at a triadic color scheme is that for people who struggle with color, often the remedy or the suggestion is to try to work in a triadic color scheme, which is basically you pick a yellow. And when I say yellow, I mean anything from about here to about here could be considered a yellow because it's got yellow in it of the primary. And anything from there to there could be considered, or even further from there to there, could be considered red. So this would be your red, this would be your yellow, and this would be your blue on this side. And so what you could do to pick is you could say, I'm going to go from here, right? So I'm going to take that color, and because I'm there, right, then the opposite, or the third, would be over here. So I'm going to use that color. And then if I'm already picking right here, then I'm also going to pick up here. Basically equal thirds on the color wheel. Or you could take a green. You could work with a green, a purple, and a orange. Or you could come on the other side and work with a purple, and then more of a greenish yellow, and then more of a pink. Or you could work a color scheme that just basically has red, yellow, and blue, right? Each of those would be, and then basically you can use white and black, but that's a triadic color scheme, and you're not allowed to use any other colors than what you can mix with those. So, you know, in this family right here, you could make that color and you can use that color, and you can mix the red and the blue together, and you can get any colors that you can get. You can mix the blue and the yellow and get this kind of crappy green right here. But any colors that you can get, plus adding white and plus adding black to it, right? So we could end up with that color. And what that does is it forces you to harmonize your colors. So that's a good way of doing is working your color harmony. Again, if you're not natural to color, if color seems like, if you're getting comments that you've got problems with your color, you might want to try forcing yourself into a triadic color scheme, and then that way you're not allowed to choose all these other colors that might clash, that might not work. And that's a good exercise. And if you're in a color theory class in college, often the teacher will make you do an assignment doing a triadic color scheme. So it's all good. Okay, on to the next video. Okay, in this video we're going to talk about color temperature, and the first thing I want to show you are a couple of images, and what we're dealing with here is fire and ice. And you'll notice, and I'm just going to grab another layer here, that basically the colors, it seems obvious to say, well, oranges and reds and yellows are fire colors, and that's why we call them warm colors, and ice is made of blues and purples and greens, and so that's why we call those cool colors. But it really is true, and all the things you think about, like nighttime is cooler than daytime, and typically nighttime you would use more cool colors because the quality of the light coming from the moon is more cool, and the quality of the light coming from the sun, which is also made of oranges and reds and yellows, are warmer. And so temperature really matters, and it's something that we talk about a lot more in the painting color and light class, which I also strongly recommend. But these are the colors that I'm pulling out here. And let's see if we can get one that's even more saturated right there. There we go. So those are the warm colors, and then the cool colors. We're going to pull out colors like this. And maybe even some darker ones down in here. Brilliant blues. Purples would also fit into that category. Again, if you look at the color wheel right here, basically, when we're talking about warm and cool colors, we can divide the color wheel basically in half, and we can say that in general, everything on one side is all warm colors, and everything on the other side is all cool colors. Even when we get over towards the pinks, and then, I mean, now this is all relative too. Like pink is warmer than violet. Violet is warmer than blue or purple. Purple is warmer than blue. And then we switch. Blue is colder than aqua and teal and so on and so forth. So again, the coldest color is the blue and the warmest color is the orange. And that's why they're opposites on the color wheel. Okay, so with that, let's jump in and talk about local color a little bit. So we get rid of that. And let's talk about local colors of objects, and specifically mountains. The local color is actually the color that an object actually is, right? So, for instance, if you had a red M&M, and the local color would be red because it's red. But if you shined, if you shined a blue light on it, like let's say you went outside at nighttime and you shined a purple light or a blue light on that red M&M, it's going to take on the color of the light that's influencing it, and that would be called the apparent color. The apparent color is the color that something appears to be, or what it looks like at the time that you're looking at it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the actual color. So I'm just going to go through some of these really quick and show you that, like, a mountain can be any color, and we tend to assign colors, to we tend to think of objects as being certain colors, and my contention is that you can find a mountain that is every single color of the rainbow, based on the lighting conditions, based on the materials that it's made out of. The same for let's take a road surface, right? And everyone knows, like your mind knows, that blacktop or asphalt is black, right? Right. So it's some version of that, and we can check that right here. We can see, yep, it's almost down right here towards the bottom. But if we look and we start to see what happens when we go off in the distance, all of a sudden the light is influencing this blacktop, and we can see that local color is constantly changing. So we know that, like, the substance of the blacktop is black. And if you've ever seen it come right out of the machine, it really is. It's basically as black as something can get. Maybe down in this corner it's even blacker. Yeah. So, but let's look at some different road surfaces, right? So here's one. We'll just pull out some colors. Maybe we'll put them over here. So that's the color of blacktop when it's faded a little bit. Here's the color of blacktop when light is influencing it. We'll grab a little bit more there. Here's some more colors of blacktop. And we can see that on any given day, blacktop can be almost any color you can think. Now, it's not going to be saturated. Well, maybe it is, depending on, again, the light that's influencing it, right? It's just, let's see, let me erase this here. And right after a clearing storm, you're getting some other color influences. What happens when there's water vapor in the air? Lights at night. You get all kinds of colors in here. And I hope this is demonstrating to you that, well, we'll get to that guy. You've got, I mean, all those colors right there are asphalt colors, and so the mind is kind of a terrible thing in that when we're talking about color and painting colors, what we'll always tend to go to when we choose a paint is we say, well, asphalt's black, therefore I need to get black. Instead of asking ourselves, what kind of lighting situation do I want to use, and what kind of quality of light, and what kind of time of day is it going to be in, and or night, and what kind of lights are around that could influence the color. So it's very important to understand that the difference between apparent color and local color. Now let's talk about warming colors up. Okay, so let's go back to our car here, and this is a crucial thing that I want to kind of demonstrate here. I'm just going to get an ellipse tool and just kind of show you that if under most people when they paint, the natural thing for us to do is to pick a color, right? And if we're gonna color an object, it doesn't matter what it is, not just necessarily a ball, but let's say we've got a painting and we've got a ball in that painting. The natural thing to do is to go ahead and try to show dimension on that ball by maybe taking some white and then maybe taking some black, right, and adding a shadow in there, and kind of calling it good, right? And it looks like it's got dimension, right? I mean, just by doing that, we can show dimension. We can even come back in and put some reflected light down in there, like we would normally see, right? Okay, so if I do this again, I'm going to show you something that will work a little bit better, and that is that instead of using white and black, I'm going to move to the next color on the color wheel. So I've kind of got my shadow shape or shadow color in there, and but now, so I'm going to go ahead and select this. I'm going to move around the color wheel. So if I'm right here, and by the way, this color is actually the color wheel, but it's in a bar. And if you took this red right here and this red right here, and you joined them up, they're the exact same color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to a warmer color, and I'm going to go a little more saturated. And I'm going to put that color on top. Let me get another layer here. Right. And then for that, and that's going to be the light area. That's going to, what that'll do, and you can see it in this car right here, is it's going to give you a more rich color, and it's going to look more true to life. It's going to look more like if you have warm light hitting your subject. And you can do that. You can see this We've even got a cool color down here, and that's like the reflected light, or the reflection that's coming in the shadow, which would be the same as a reflected light on this. I'm just going to hide that selection there. And you could take that even further to the extreme. You can go up higher, and you could put the highlight on there, even more saturated, or you can go even lighter with that. But it's going to look a lot more. It's going to look a lot more rich. Sometimes I kind of have to fool around with the color a little bit, but you're going to just keep going around the color wheel until you get it to where it looks good. What happens when you use white, it tends to make your colors look chalky, and when you use black, it tends to deaden the shadows, the shadow colors. We can still use black a little bit in here. It's not wrong, and I can still see that there's some black down in here. This is going to be our halftone area right here. So and this is like a you know, you can play back and forth with this, and you can even, you know, your highlight could. I don't want to lock you in and say, you know, your highlight can't be super light, because it can. But I'm just saying in general, when you're choosing colors to lighten a specific color, go with moving around the color wheel. Let me show you another one real quick. So we'll get rid of that, and we'll get rid of these layers here. And let me show you this one right here, so you can see it. I'm just gonna pick them and just kind of show you that the local color is probably going to be found right in here. So that's going to be, whoops. Oh, I've still got the selection, I think. There we go. So that's going to be our local color. That's the color that the car actually is. But when we have warm sunlight, you know, and this is like the warm tones in the atmosphere hitting, you're going to start to come around the color wheel, and you're even going to get into these pinks. And so we're looking here, but as we move down to this color, you can see how it goes cooler. So when you want to warm a color, you move towards the warmth. Okay, let's look at another one. Let's look at this car right here. Same thing. This is going to be our local color right here that we find in the halftone. These tones right here. And then as we move into the highlight area, we're going to move around the color wheel. So again, we went from cold or cooler right here. And then if we select this, you can see where that jumps down to the warmer. Okay. Same with green. The halftone is probably somewhere in there is the actual paint color. And then where do we go? We go to yellow. Right? So we'll look at that one. There's green, and then when we warm it, we go more towards orange. So we're going towards the orange to warm it up. Now the problem comes when you hit yellow. Yellow becomes a problem because yellow is the lightest on the spectrum, the lightest on the color wheel right there. And so there's really nowhere to go lighter. You don't want to go green. Green's the next color next to it, because then your yellow car is going to look green. You don't want to go orange, because orange is actually darker in value, and you're trying to lighten it up. So the best thing that you can do with yellow is actually make the yellows more rich, in that you're going to take the shadows, and instead of going gray and neutral, which is what you see here. So here's your more yellowy color. This whole thing is kind of ugly looking, right? But if you look at this one over here, you're going to be getting these orangey tones next to the yellows, and that's going to make it look more rich and more appealing. Now, the last thing on this is on talking about warming up colors and stuff is, as you warm the color, you will also often have to add a little bit of white. So you're tinting and you're adding the lighter color on the color wheel. And that'll keep your colors rich, but also moving lighter. So in the case when we made the ball, you've got dark areas and you've got light areas, and so you have to be able to control those. And that becomes a trick where you just have to have a lot of practice and experimentation on how much white to add, how much of the warmer color on the color wheel to add. And it's not going to be super easy to determine, but you can do it. So to finish with one last thing, you'll often hear art teachers say, whenever you're painting, don't use black. And and then I'll have students that'll ask me, should I buy, like ivory black or Mars black? One, don't buy Mars black. I've never been able to figure out how to make Mars black work. It's so powerful and so potent. I would stick with ivory black, but a lot of teachers say don't even use that. Like, mix your colors, and you can mix your colors and get really dark colors, right? You can get there if you mix your colors and you neutralize. It's harder to do digitally, but if you're working with actual traditional paint, you can do it. Working digitally, you kind of have to use black because the system kind of relies on that, but the way that the way it's programmed is a little bit different. But if you mix like a burnt umber and a ultramarine blue or a phthalo blue, you can get pretty close to black because the burnt umber is warm, the phthalo blue is really cool, and you put those together, they're neutralizing and they're staying that value, staying really dark, and so they turn kind of close to black. The thing is, this is the reason what I just explained is why. So you have some teachers that will say don't use black, and they don't even know the reason why. You ask them, they're like, because it'll muddy your colors. Well, there is no such thing as a muddy color that you should never use, because every single one of these colors, like this right here, this color right here could be considered mud, right? And if we move along through the color wheel, every single color family has mud as part of its background or history or whatever you want to call it. In fact, we can go more neutralized than that, right? These are all muddy colors, and muddy colors are great, and you can find a place for them in every single painting. And muddy colors come from basically neutralizing paint. The problem is that people don't understand the principle that I just laid out, and so they're using black for every single shadow color. They're not using they're not warming or cooling, because you do the same thing in reverse. If you're under cool light and you have a local color that's warm, you can add cooler colors to make it even cooler and look like it's at nighttime. And as long as you're doing that, you can control your saturations and you can control your color balances, and you don't have to worry about your whole painting turning to mud. So some teachers will tell you not to use black because they don't understand. They've just been told that from their teacher. They never really learned why. And then others understand that you're probably better off learning how to mix colors without using black, and I agree with that. But once you learn how to mix colors, you can use black as much as you want, and it fits everywhere. And then the proof of that is in the printing process. They use called CMYK, which is cyan, yellow, magenta, and black. One of the printing colors is black. So everything that you've ever seen that's printed, any book or magazine, any poster, any beautiful art prints, guess what? They have black in them, because as part of the printing process, there are only those 4 inks. There are printing processes that use more than 4 colors, but in general, they can get really good color, really good rich colors with just those 4 colors. Okay, that's enough about warm and cool colors and color temperature. Okay, I'm back. It's another day and I have a new shirt on, and in this video I really want to stress the idea of choosing colors deliberately, really having a game plan for the colors that you choose. And most people, most artists, when they start out, we start out with a box of crayons as a kid, and we just made arbitrary decisions. We just picked a color that we liked, and we started going to town. And most artists, I find, even ones that have gone through high school and even a lot that have gone through college, still make their color choices in a random fashion based on what they feel like choosing. And that is ignoring a whole side of color and what color means and how color can impact you. And there's a whole science behind the psychology of color. I'm just gonna pull up a website really quick. It's a great resource. I'm not gonna go into all of the psychology of color because you could take a whole college course on that. But marketers use color to make decisions, to sell products, and it's found. The science of how we perceive different colors and how we feel is really deep. And I just want to read a couple of really quick case studies that are fascinating to me. One is about the ketchup company Heinz. Consider the phenomenal success Heinz Easy Squirt Blastin' Green ketchup has had in the marketplace. More than 10 million bottles were sold in the first 7 months following its introduction, with Heinz factories working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to keep up with demand. The result, 23 million in sales, attributable to Heinz Green Ketchup, the highest sales increase in the brand's history. So Heinz has been around for a long time, and just by changing the color, they woke people up and their sales increased dramatically. Another one was Apple Computer, and I remember this as a child. I remember when the first Apple computers came out. They brought color into the marketplace where color had not been seen before by introducing the colorful iMacs. Apple was the first to say it doesn't have to be beige. The iMacs invigorated a brand that had suffered 1.8 billion of losses in 2 years. And I guess what I'm talking about is the first time I saw Apple, they had the rainbow Apple logo. What they're talking about here is the colored iMacs. But it gives you an idea of how color can impact us when we're thinking about things, considering things, when we're looking at your artwork, my artwork. So let's look at some kind of a chart here that talks about how we feel with different colors. And you may agree with some of this, you might not agree with some of this, but I think in general this is kind of how people feel, and also how companies, when ad agencies or when design firms first start working with a company, what kinds of things they talk about to their client to then start making logical color choices for their logo, for their branding, for their products, and different things like that. I think it's really interesting to think about those kinds of things. And here we see, color used as symbols. Color symbolizes, the lack of color, or dark color symbolizes death, versus, how we feel about reds and oranges and green, how green can symbolize new life. And ask yourself, like on the pink skates there, what gender are those typically sold to? Are they sold to boys or to girls? And why? And it's obvious. It's like, well, obviously pink is sold to girls, but why? Those are symbols that we've chosen, and they matter. So when you make color choices, if you're making arbitrary color choices, you might be sending a signal, or you might be communicating something that is either enhancing your story or detracting from your story. Again, if we look at just the color red, how red is used to signify attention, danger, poison berries, hot chilies, obviously blood and hazards and things like that. And we use red often to display those different things. Okay, now let's talk about mood a little bit. How do you feel when you look at this photo versus when you look at this photo. You know, just those, and a lot of it, you know, some of it is the image itself. But if we strip the color away and we went to black and white, you know, would it feel the same? I don't think so. I think the color really has a lot to do with actually how we feel about and how our brain perceives these images. And the last thing that I want to share on this one is a piece of my own work and the idea of using color for focal points. We talk a lot about color in focal points in our studio classes, specifically in our design classes and in our children's book classes and things like that. Color choices, where to put certain colors. If you can always remember that warm colors come forward and cool colors recede, that's kind of it's kind of a piece of knowledge that you kind of need to burn into your brain, that if you use cool colors, they're much easier to place those in the background than if you put really warm reds and oranges and yellows. Now, not to say that you can't do that, because you can always break the rules, but in general, your eye will go to the warm colors first. So if there's something in the background that you want your viewer to see first, then warm colors would probably be an appropriate choice. Likewise, warm colors in the foreground are going to put your eye on the foreground and cause attention there. And if that's what you're intending, then that's great. So like on this image right here, I chose the most saturated red for the scarf of this little mouse. But you can see, if I do a little paint over and show you what it would look like if the mouse had a blue scarf, you know, if I wasn't thinking and I just kind of chose that color arbitrarily, now the focus is not on that mouse anymore. In fact, it's actually harder to understand the picture, and you kind of have to look a little bit more. It's hard to unsee what you've already seen, but I think you understand the point, that if you save your reds and your oranges for those focal points, maybe that one main focal point, maybe there's a few extra ones, and you can see in this image also I desaturated all these other colors. So if I pull out really quick these other colors, you know that the strawberry is red, but look at how muted this color is right here. That's the strawberry color, and here's the highlight on it. I mean, I can't get, and I think what it is that your brain is telling you that this is a red strawberry, but it's really falling back into the background versus these colors, these actual more saturated oranges and reds, right? And so they're going to always gain the attention. Same thing up here on this mushroom. We've got these warm colors up here. We've got these pinks, but they're not anywhere near as saturated. If we look in the color picker, they're right in the middle. Okay, so the general rule and the purpose of talking about this is just be very deliberate. Have a reason, and have a method to the colors that you choose. Okay guys, in this video I want to talk about creating rich brown colors, and as opposed to dull brown colors. And you'll notice as we look at the color wheel right here, I'm not seeing any brown there. So the question is brown a color? And hopefully you're nodding your head no, because brown is not a color. Brown is a word that we use to describe neutralized colors, which we already talked about. Whenever a color moves away from its perfect chroma, from its intense rich chroma, so all these colors right here are in their purest form. Brown is not found on the rainbow. Neither is white or black. And so these are the pure colors that we have. And we talked a little bit before about mixing those, right? And that's kind of where we end up getting some brown colors from. Let's see if I can mix a brown right here, something that would be more in the brown realm. I need more orange in there. Yeah, something like that. And then if we added some black to it, we could probably get closer. But anyway, I'm just having fun here, experimenting. There's a brown color right there. So let's talk more about how we get rich browns. So we've all mixed paints, and we know that we can mix different brown colors, right? And a lot of times we'll come up with a color that looks like mud, that's not very appealing, and we'll end up painting a tree, or we'll paint a table, or a house, and we'll paint that with the brown color that we mixed up, and we're like, how come it looks so dull? How come it looks so muddy? How come it looks so blah? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. Take, for example, this cabin right here. Let's pull some colors out of this, some of those brown tones, and see if we can get anything that resembles a rich brown color. I don't think we can. Yeah, all these colors are like, let's see, where's this color found? It's like, it's got tons of white mixed in and tons of black. Again, here's the pure color up here. How about this one? Yeah, so they're all really neutralized. You can even call these grays. I mean, brown, is that gray or is that brown? Well, it's got mostly white and black, but it's got a little bit of color. What about this right here? What color is that? Gray? I mean, is gray only, can you only have gray that's got black and white? Are there cool grays and warm grays? Right? Is this, if I do this, is that a cool gray? Yeah, I mean, we come up with words to describe, and what we really should be doing is thinking in terms of temperature and in terms of neutralization. So this cabin right here with these gray tones would be something I would think, if you mix up that color and then you go in and you start painting your cabin, that's what you're going to end up with, is a dull looking brown. And that's what I think most of us do when we first start out. But if we think about, and a lot of this has to do with lighting, and we do have the painting, color, and light class as well, where we talk a lot more about this. But I want to touch on this here because I think it's important to understand in a color class that browns, rich browns, are made up of many different colors, or objects that appear to be brown. If you want them to be rich, they're going to have many different colors involved in bringing out those rich brown tones. And it's not just coming up with one color and then painting the whole thing. And as we looked at with warming colors, like in the cars that we warmed up in the previous a few videos ago, that's true for any object, that making an object look rich, with rich color, vibrant color, you're going to be using lots of different colors to make it. In the next video, I'm going to show you, if you're painting traditionally with actual paint, what colors I buy to represent, to recreate browns. But this hopefully this will give you kind of an idea. Let's look real quick, and I don't want to beat this to death, but I do think that it's important to kind of think about this differently than we've thought about it before. Let's pull out colors from all these handbags, right? And see, like, each one of these would be described as brown, right? I think we would probably describe each one of these as a brown bag, and yet each one is kind of in a slightly different color from a different color family, like on the color wheel, right? Some really grays and some pinks. And so if we went and identified each one of these handbags, where the color, the root color was coming from, or the saturated chroma that it's coming from, we'd find that they're all over the rainbow. So each one of these handbags could be described as brown, and yet it's really meaningless to say brown, because it can mean so many different things. So it's better to think in terms of neutralization. You will also become a better colorist if you think and can identify by looking at a color where its root color is on the color wheel, and you'll start to see brown different. Like I would look at this bag and see it as a red, right? Or maybe this one right here. I would say that's a red bag, even though it's highly neutralized. It's in the red family, right? So its root color is really coming from this. Anyway, I think that's a better way to look at colors, and especially brown colors. Again, making colors look rich. I used to have a hard time painting chocolate. I love chocolate. I apologize if this is going to trigger some of you, but actually I don't apologize. These are the colors we're looking at to get these rich browns, and even, then the highlights being in the right place. Yeah. So anyway, think of when you think of painting something brown or any other color. Again, I'm going to just reiterate. Try to identify how many colors are in that to end up building that color family up to describe the object that you want to describe. Now here's a piece of art that I did a few years back, and you'll see that I'm basically doing this. I could go in here and pick out all these colors, and we would see just a lot of different colors are making up that brown, these brown tones, right? All throughout the tree, even on the dark side. It's important to have those darks in there too. The darks really allow you to highlight the light areas. Lighting has a lot to do with it again, using that same principle. And I just did a piece the other day, and the same thing. This tree. And this is basically my shorthand for getting rich color is just a rich brown color is to kind of come in and pick a light source that will actually place some of the tree or some of the brown object, part of the brown object in shadow and part of it in the light, and that allows me to use more of those colors. So sometimes people will say to me, like, "Man, I really love your color. How do you get such rich color?" And you can pick colors around. I'm using really dull colors. Those colors are not exciting colors. They're highly neutralized and darkened. It's the colors that they warm to that actually, and when you pair those together, that look good. Right? Like this color right here is not a very interesting color, right? These are just kind of ordinary colors. But when you place a more saturated color next to it, the way they build and the way they move together really kind of makes it look more interesting. So hopefully you'll paint more rich brown colors after watching this. Okay, this video is going to be called Optical Illusions in Color, and hopefully this will help you understand how important it is to mix paint, learn how to mix paint to get the color and the value that you want, but also to understand that you have to rely on the way things look and painting, trusting your eyes even though your eyes are going to lie to you. So let's dig into this, and let's see what I'm actually talking about here. So a lot of you have probably seen this optical illusion before, and if you haven't, this is going to probably blow your mind a little bit, but the square A and the square B are actually the same value even though they look totally different. Okay, so A not the letters, but the squares, A and B, are identical in value. So let's just, to prove that, we'll select there, and they're the exact same. No matter how many times I do that, it's not going to be lighter than A. I could do this all day, and I'm going to get the same color. That's because your eyes are lying to you. Whether you knew it or not, your eyes are really good at lying. And the reason they do that is probably evolutionary, in that we have to be able to see a lot of value ranges. We have to be able to see in shadows and in sunlight. And so our eyes kind of look for contrast. And that's more what they're looking for, is contrast, rather than getting the absolute, like, is that shadow the exact same color? Is that light, the dark part of that light area? Evolutionarily speaking, we probably didn't need to be able to recognize those similarities. Therefore, our eyes are more adapted to seeing the contrast. That's the best way I can put it. There's probably a better scientific explanation for this. But as we move on, here's another one, and again, these chess pieces are identical in value. In other words, if we removed the space around the backgrounds, they would both be identical. And we could play this game all day, but like if we go right up here and then right up here, we're gonna get the same value. Now this one's got a lot of value variation, but you know, this is black right here, and look at the top of that one's also black. But it's an optical illusion again, because what's happening is your perception of color and value is going to change based on what those colors and values are around it. And again, this is why learning how to mix paint is so important, and instead of taking a mechanical approach. Now some people like to mix up a batch of paint and say, this is the color that I'm going to use on like let's say there's a lot of they're doing a village scene, and there's a lot of houses, and all the houses have the same stucco. And so rather than mixing paint as you go, it's logical to mass produce a quantity of paint, mix up the color, and then the color's the same throughout. But that is a bad way to paint. It's not a good way to paint, and the reason for that is that light and shadow conditions are constantly changing the value of those colors. All right, and what I mean, like, let me show you this. Okay, so look at this room right here, and we're going to quickly see, that when I select here, I'm going to pull out different colors. They might be subtle, but obviously this side's going to be different because the light is hitting it differently. You'd think that that's a flat wall, right? And that it should get a flat color. And that's what we tend to think. But what's really happening is, and if you look in your house or your apartment or wherever you are right now, flat walls are constantly changing in value and color. And so mixing up one single color is a bad approach for something like that. And so through understanding that our eyes can lie to us, the cool thing is we don't have to, like I said before, we don't have to try to match color and get it perfect, because it doesn't need to be perfect. Because look right here, there's constantly gradation going on, there's constantly color change, and nice transitional smooth blends of color based on lighting. So you don't need to try to get it flat, you don't need to try to get it to be all the same, because it isn't the same. Let's look at a few more here. Both dogs are identical. I know I probably don't have to show you this, but I'm guessing that you probably want to see it anyway. The top of the tail, same color. And again, our eyes are lying to us. Same dress, same identical dress. This one's kind of interesting. There are only two colors on this graphic, pink and green. There is no red. And this one really demonstrates how colors will change or appear to change based on what they're next to. So again, as you're painting, how you can take this information to help you is to understand that you have to develop your visual acuity to color changes, and you really need to step back from your painting. If you're painting traditionally, put it across the room, put it in the next room if you can, and that will help to reveal what's actually happening, what you're actually seeing, because it's more abstract, it's more distant, and you can focus on the whole thing. If you're working digitally, you need to make sure that you're constantly zooming out so that you can see your entire painting in the same way, where you can look for the value differences and the color differences, rather than falling in love with what you painted and not really being critical and understanding what you're actually seeing. So if we zoom in on this one, you can start to see it, I'm sure, but these pixels are the same. So if I grab that right there and I grab that right there, they're basically the same color. So yeah, there's that. And then let's look now at vibrating colors. Hopefully you're seeing what I'm seeing, and that is that this graphic looks like it's moving. Obviously it's in Photoshop, so it's a still image. You can see it on my layer here. It's not a GIF or anything like that. It really does appear to move. And the problem with vibrating colors, and if it's done unintentionally, you're going to create an awkward and an unnerving feeling in your drawing or painting, I guess. It's hard to look at. This graphic kind of shows that the extreme of the actual vibration. Now you're not going to make a painting like this, but the fact that the intensity of what's happening here is the intensity of the chroma of these two colors is about the same. And so what they're doing is they're competing with each other. The green is saying look at me, the blue is saying look at me, and it creates your eyes to try to focus on both at the same time, and it just can't. And so it kind of tricks out the rods and cones in your eyes. Now you might remember that we had already talked about these ladies before, and that's basically what's happening here, is that these two colors right here are competing for your attention, right? So we talked about that. Here is another graphic that kind of shows that with those similar colors, and you just really get a lot of movement when you see something like this. Let's look at one last one. This one basically shows that, like, if you try to use these kinds of colors that are the same value intensity, you would end up with something like this. Anyway, I hope this helps. Make sure that you I can't stress it enough, learn to mix paint, learn to see, be critical of the things that you're seeing, and it will definitely help out your painting. Okay, this video is for those of you who want to paint traditionally. If you're working digitally, this one's probably not going to help you a lot, but I think you should probably, or you probably already have been doing both, so it still might interest you. Let's go to the art store and look at some of the paint that they have in there. One thing that you'll notice is how many colors there are, the vast number of options that you have. But there are a few little things to look for. One is some paints, some brands of paints like Grumbacher here, will actually use the word cadmium on the title of the color, but there's no cadmium found in the paint, and you have to look at the fine print on the ingredients of the paint to realize that the pigment is something other than cadmium. And sometimes you'll realize this if you have painted with cadmium, because it's such a rich, pure hue, and if you end up getting one that doesn't have cadmium in it, really quickly you'll realize that it doesn't cover, it's weak, and often you can't paint with it the way you're used to. So you have to be careful. Liquitex is doing something cool here. Now I think they're being more honest as a company. They're saying, look, this one doesn't have cadmium in it, and not only does it not have cadmium, but cadmium causes cancer. And so if you inhale, so that's the danger. I painted with cadmium for many years, and I don't think it's a risk as long as you're not getting it on your skin, and as long as you're not inhaling the powder pigment, which if you're buying paint that's already bound, you're not going to be inhaling the powder, so that's not a really concern. Also, I would suggest avoiding buying sets of paints. When you buy a set of paint, you are allowing the manufacturer to choose the paints for you. And look, when you give someone else your money and you let them make decisions for you, often they make bad decisions, or they make decisions that's in their best interest. And so I would assume that they're going to give you cheaper pigments and cheaper paints, and also you're probably going to get colors that you can't really use as well. And that's why I'm going to give you a list of the pigments that I use, because as an illustrator, you're trying to what you're wanting to do is recreate every single color that's out there. Now, if you're painting in oils or you're doing canvas painting, you will really rely on the subtleties of colors that are actually mixed on the canvas. But for illustration, where your image is going to be digitized anyway. For print, it's going to be digitized. It has to be digitized. If it's for web, it's going to be digitized. If it's for video and so forth. So what you're concerned with is being able to recreate every single color in the rainbow. And this list that I'm showing you now will help you do that. Now, there might be some substitutions that you might find you like better, or other artists might give you some suggestions. But the big takeaway on this is this will save you this will save you money, because you're not going to buy every paint that they offer. And it's also going to help you learn your color theory a lot better. It's going to help you learn how to mix paints much better. And so you're going to have the ability to get any color that you need with this little recipe of colors here. So the problem with mixed paints that they're selling you is, one, the reason that the paint manufacturers make all this huge variety of paints is simply they can make more money. Because when you go to the art store and you see a color and you're like, oh, that's the color that I need too, and I need this one, and I need that one, and you're just going to buy more. When really you've got all those colors and already that you can mix with white and black and mixing different colors together, and you can get all those colors. The only time that I would say that you need that would be a good time to buy pre-mixed colors. And when I say pre-mixed, what I'm saying is, like this list that I'm giving you right here, they're all pure pigments. They're not two different pigments combined with white or black or other things. They're just the pure pigment. So you've got the answers all right there. The only time, though, that I would say you should maybe buy pre-mix is if you're doing huge paintings, murals, big huge canvases where you need a lot of one color and it's just more economical and it's just easier for you to get really close to the colors you're looking for with the pre-mixed ones. But other than that, if you're doing illustrations on your desk, I would say this is a good place to start. This is a good list. So let's talk about it a little bit real quick. So cadmium is a pigment. It's an element, and it produces really, really, really rich reds, oranges, and yellows. It comes in those three, and you will see cadmium yellow lights and cadmium yellow mediums. I don't think you need all of them. If you get a cad yellow light and you get a nice cad orange or cad orange light and then a nice cadmium red, I think you're going to be fine, because you can mix it. If you get the yellow medium, then it's more towards orange, and so you're going to have a harder time with your yellows. So I didn't put that on the list because to me it's not as important to dial in on those specific things. But if you were going to choose, I would go with yellow light. Phthalo is another pigment, and it comes in a green and a blue, and it also comes in, the blue will come in a green shade or a red shade. And basically what that means is the red shade is going to be more towards the purple side of the color wheel, and the green shade is going to move more towards aqua. So the green shade of the blue phthalo, P-phthalo, is going to give you, the green side is going to give you the aquas. You'll be able to paint really nice underwater scenes and stuff. The red shade will give you more purples. And to me, it's not enough of a difference that if I always got the green shade just because I felt like the next color, aqua violet, there would give me, when mixed with aqua violet, it would give me those purples that I'm looking for. So that was never really a concern. You can have both if you've got the money and you can afford both, but you don't have to. The dioxazine purple, to me, that was a really important one to have. You can, if you're on a real budget, you could eliminate that one, and you could get the phthalo blue red shade with aqua violet, and you're going to be able to basically make that dioxazine purple. I just liked having that one, so I still have that on the list. And that's really it for your colors. I mean, like, that's going to hit all the colors in the rainbow. And then the next part of the list is browns. And these are colors that I liked. You can substitute the red oxide and the yellow ochre for your cad orange. And you can mix cad orange and burnt sienna and a little bit of red in there, and you can get all those tones. So you can save a little bit more money by not getting the yellow ochre or the burnt umber. I just kind of liked them when I'm mixing browns to have a little bit of that, because it seemed like it was easier to get the browns colors that I wanted, but I can get them with mixing the other colors, the yellow. And as we talked about browns already, there's yellow browns, purple browns, red browns, green browns, orange browns. And so, using those colors that you already have, the reds and the orange and the yellows, that's going to help you, along with black. Black is very important for making your browns. And then, of course, a little bit of white in there. I like the ivory black instead of the Mars black. The Mars black is very hard to control. It's super powerful. You'll notice when you're mixing colors that a little bit of one goes a long way and a little bit of others hardly do anything at all. Mars black is like, it's like from another planet. It's like kryptonite or something. It's weird. It's so powerful that I don't know anybody that uses it. So ivory black is also a little bit warmer. It's just got a little bit of a warm tint to it. And then your titanium white. Anyway, those are the colors, and hopefully that will help you, number one, save money, but also learn how to mix your paint. Okay, guys, now is the time where you get to put some of the knowledge that you've learned from this video into practice, and this is going to be the homework video. So, like I mentioned in the introduction to this class, if you were taking this class as a student at an art school or a college, and you were taking color theory, almost every class that I've been involved with or heard about, they all give about the same type of homework assignments, and that is to create color swatches. And by that I mean something like this. Now you're probably used to seeing these in a paint store, and obviously these are created mechanically or with a computer, but what we're talking about is something more like this, where you actually are going to mix paint. Now the reason for doing this is equal parts of two different colors or two different values of colors don't always produce the results that you want, And in order to really learn about color, in order to really learn how to mix paint, you kind of have to get your hands dirty. So this assignment is, it's up to you to do your due diligence on. Some people really take this to heart and spend a lot of time, and they'll even take a lot of time in making sure that their craftsmanship is really, really well done. When I was in color theory in college, they gave us about 6 weeks to work on this assignment. And so it's not something that you're going to whip out probably in a day. But you could get a lot done if this is the only thing that you're working on. And basically what we're going to do is, let me show you here, is we take like a grid, a 100 grid. This will be available for download if you want to print it off. However, I think it would be better and easier for you to do if you're going to actually get a piece of paper, like watercolor paper or canvas or something that you're familiar with painting on. You can do this in watercolor, you can do this in acrylics, you can do this in oils. Doing it digitally could help too, but I think that well, if you're a digital painter and you're only working digitally, then you probably should do it digitally, because you'll still learn a lot doing it digitally. But it is easier. There's no question about it. And working in actual paint is much harder, but it will really help you become familiar with what happens when you mix paints. So this is the first assignment, the color swatches, and then I'll give you another one after that. So this first one, you can do this as many times as you want, but I would suggest you do it at least 6 times, 6 different grids. And what we're looking for on this is using either using primary and secondary and or tertiary colors. So if you and we're going to start with pure saturated colors. So what I'm talking about is that's going to be your base color is either red, yellow, or blue, and then we also talked about orange being secondary, green being secondary. So I would do it for the primary and the secondary colors, and then if you want to go further, you could go for tertiary colors as well, like something like this would be a tertiary color. And anyway, you can have fun with it. It's very relaxing. To me, it's very relaxing. You're not concentrating on drawing. And so what we're going to do is I'll just start working on one here, and I'll kind of give you the example. So let's say I was going to start with kind of this teal color here, right? Actually, let me start with a darker color. I'm going to go with a blue here. So I'm gonna paint this first square, and some people actually do this where they cut out the swatches. So they'll paint and then they'll actually cut it out and glue it on. That's another way of doing it. There's a lot of different ways of doing this. But again, if you were to grid this off with a ruler on your paper, you could paint in those squares, and you can paint over them. I would suggest you use something like acrylic or oil. Probably acrylic though. I would really think acrylic would be the easiest, or gouache, because you can paint over what you've already painted. Because what we're going to try to do is get a gradation or a progression of colors, of the color to going towards black and towards white, and then everything in between. And so you're not going to get it right on the first try. But if you start with a pure hue in one corner, and then pure black in another corner, and then the bottom two are going to be white, and then what you're going to do is basically mix those. So if I were using actual paint, I would get some black out on my palette, and then I would get some of the color that I've chosen to use, and I would try to hit the middle of that color, what felt like a good middle. And again, this might change, but then I'd put that somewhere in here. This is guesswork. And if you're not used to guesswork, this is a really good exercise for you, because it forces you to go into the possibility of failing. And that's a good place to be as an artist, because if you're afraid to fail, you're going to be paralyzed and you're going to have a hard time starting this, right? So I'm always going to, as I'm going towards this pure hue color, I'm always going to start with that. And so on your palette, you're going to grab some of that, and I'm going to put a little bit more, mix a little bit more with the black, and then I'm going to put that in here. And the idea is to get a really gradual transition. It looks like mine might have gone a little too close, but quickly, but we'll see. So now I'm going to take this middle color, and again, if you're working in paint, you can't just select it like I did. You got to mix it up again and try to match that paint color, right? So you match that, and then you go the other way with black, and you put a little bit of black in there. And that didn't work. Why didn't that work? There we go, because I didn't select it. And I'm going to put a little bit more black in. This should work. And if it doesn't, it's just going to prove how hard this actually is. But you can start to see, you'll really start to learn what colors you need to mix in order to make colors. And it really helps when you get down in here, and I'll go down in there that far. So right here, there should just be a little bit of blue left into that color. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing over here on this side. We're going to get some of this color, and then we're going to mix a little bit of white in, and we're going to try to come up with that middle tone, halfway in between white and blue. And maybe it's this right here. So I'm guessing, and I could be wrong. Now, if I needed to change these over here, I could paint over those squares. If you're working in acrylic, it's easy to paint over them. If you're working in watercolor, it gets really tough, because when you get down in here, unless you're using white paint, it's going to be really hard to get those right. But it's a good exercise to do in watercolor as well, because if that's your medium, then you need to learn that medium. And so then in that case, I would probably suggest using watercolor. Again, I'm trying to get to white here, so I have to make sure that I'm going far enough, fast enough, because that bottom square is white. So mix again, and there we go. And then I'm going to take this pure color again, or actually, nope, I'm going to match this middle color. And then I'm going to add this color back into it, this pure hue. And this one should be a little bit darker. Let's do that again. Yeah, it should be darker. And we're getting there. And then last time, really kind of mix that in. Now again, mixing digitally, it's not the same. It's just not the same thing at all. Okay, now I'm going to start on this one right here. I'm going to take this color, and now this one gets white mixed in with it, right? So we'll try to make that middle tone, and we'll pop it in there. And then we'll add white to that. Let's just move that off to the side there. So we'll go ahead and put white on that. And then we'll put white on that. And then one more time. And then we'll go the other way. And we're going to add some of this back in. then do it again. All the way back up to the top. Pretty close. This one jumps a little far. I think it's because I'm on a multiply layer. Yeah. Where it's, there we go. So then you could take these and kind of do the same thing. You know, this is kind of another exercise. Another way people do it is they mix one into the other to try to get that to go down. So we start here, and then we take some of this and put it in here. Although that's not going to go over top very well. Let's get another layer. It's a little different working digitally, but I think you get the point. And you want to end up with this square down here being totally white, right? So, well, this whole bottom row is going to be totally white. But anyway, it's quite an exercise, and but it will really teach you a lot about color. And again, you can do it as many times as you want. And now let's go into the next piece of homework. Okay, so if that wasn't enough homework, maybe this will be. So this is the part 2. Same thing. We're going to do swatches, but this gets a little more complicated. Now you could, if you feel like you could do the other one really well, you could skip that and go right to this. But basically, it's the same assignment, but we're going to add 2 colors, and we're going to add 2 opposite colors on the color wheel. And so I'm going to pick red and green, but you could do yellow and purple, or you could do orange and black. And so basically, and you could do tertiaries on this one too. So you could take this one as far as you want to go. In fact, if you bring in the color wheel that we had before and just draw a line straight through it, that would be, let me get the color wheel. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about. You could take this color wheel, and any place where you draw a line going straight through it, these are opposites, right? So you could do one based on any of these kinds of colors. Okay, and so we're going to add black in one corner, and in the opposite corner we're going to have white. So this is going to make things a little bit more challenging, but I think a little more fun too. It's a little more complex. So basically you're going to do the same thing. You know, we're going to start with our pure color. We're going to shoot for the middle, right? Try to get a good middle color there, and we'll pop that in. And then we'll do the same thing over here on this side. You know, I don't know if I got that totally. I want to make sure I have that really saturated. So we do the same thing over here. Shoot for the middle. And then we're going to fill these out. You know how to do that already, right? We're going to go for black. You could go for the middle each time if you wanted and skip a square. But then it gets interesting when we try to go from red to green. So we might do that here, where we take the pure red and the pure green, and we shoot for the middle. Now this is an exercise in neutralizing your colors. So these squares right here should also line up. So this would be right in the middle. This will really help you understand those muddy colors that get a bad rap and that are sometimes talked about as, you know, don't use these specific colors because you'll get mud, or don't over mix because you'll get mud. And again, there's no such, you cannot make a bad color. Every single color or every shade or every tint of a color has a place in the color world. It's said that our eye can detect over 1 million shades of color, and every one of them can be found in a painting somewhere. So there is no such thing as a bad color. There's only bad uses of a color. So I'm going to continue on here, put a little more red in that. This is kind of one of those exercises that you could do with, your favorite podcast, or you could even watch a TV program. It's pretty relaxing, and the only thing that you're really concerned with is you don't want to get a huge jump in between these swatches. You want to shoot for the most gradual progression that you can get. And if you have a big jump, you can go back in there and paint over top of them. Okay, so we're going to go this way now. I think I got that a little heavy there. No, it's still heavy. This is where working digitally is easier. Faux show. Oops, going the wrong way. Oop. Something like that. Okay, there we go. Those are the equal, and then again, if you're going to go, when you go down this way, you're going to mix with white. Down this side here, shoot for the middle. Something like that. That's kind of what we might call a minty green, right? We always try to assign words to colors. There you go, more mint. And there we go, and then go the other way. And then, anyway, when you flesh this whole thing out, it's going to look pretty cool, but I'm not going to do it all here on video. Actually, you know what? Maybe I will, and maybe I'll just speed it up just to show that what the final should look like. So maybe I'll throw some music over it and come back at the end. Okay, so there you go. There's the the finished grid, and that should give you an idea of how to do this. Again, working digitally, totally different than working with actual paint. I did this in probably 25 minutes, whereas if I was working in paint, this would probably take all day. But it's a good exercise, because when you get into these neutral colors right here in the middle, you start to understand when you see those in a painting, or you see that you need that color, or you're using reference and you see that color, this is going to give you an idea of how to get there much faster without tearing your hair out and being frustrated and thinking that you have the wrong paint, when often you have the right paints, you're just not mixing them enough, or you're putting too much of one color in and you're wasting a lot of paint because you're mixing up a little bit, and you just have to keep adding more white because you just can't get it white enough or light enough, because you just don't realize how little pigment it takes when you mix it with white. So things like that. This exercise will really help. And again, you could do this for, you can do it 3 times for the primary and secondary colors. You can go further than that and do it for the tertiary colors as well. Anyway, that is it for the homework assignment on this video, and that's it.